Good evening and welcome. This is a regular meeting of the Princeton Planning Board on July 7th, 2022. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this meeting has been given by prominently posting the amended resolution of regularly scheduled meetings of the Planning Board of Princeton for February 2022 through January 2023. A copy was filed with the Clerk of Princeton on January 7th, 2022. Legal notice on the adoption of said resolution was published in the January 14th, 2022 edition of the Princeton Packet. Notice of this meeting also has been posted to the municipal website, princetonnj.gov/calendar. Pursuant to Executive Order 107, due to the ongoing state of emergency in New Jersey regarding COVID-19, notice that during the declared state of emergency, all regular and special meetings of the Princeton Planning Board will be held electronically via Zoom, was transmitted to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, and the Times, and was filed with the Clerk of Princeton on April 8th, 2020, and again on January 6th, 2021. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. During hearings on applications for development, members of the public will have an opportunity to comment and ask questions. Questions may be asked after each applicant's witness has testified. Public comment is heard by the board after an applicant's representatives have finished their presentations and have been questioned by planning board members and staff. When an ordinance referral is on the, excuse me, that's in italics, so I'm not supposed to read that. Skipping down. The planning board also invites public comment on proposed ordinances referred to this board by Princeton's mayor and council for our assessment of the ordinance's consistency with the Princeton Community Master Plan. Please be aware that the formal public hearing for all ordinances takes place before mayor and council at a council meeting, not before the planning board. Those wishing to comment orally should virtually raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen, or if you're participating by phone, by pressing *9. Oral comments will be taken in the order in which hands were raised. We ask with respect that members of the public express your views in 3 minutes or less. We will have a countdown clock to help speakers keep track of time. And please note that speakers who exceed 3 minutes will be interrupted. Inappropriate public comment containing obscenity, hate speech, or relating to matters not before the board will be muted. Carrie, will you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Ms. Capizoli?
Here.
Mr. Chow?
Here.
Mr. Cohen?
Here.
Mr. McGowan?
Here.
Mr. O'Donnell? Mr. Quinn?
Here.
Ms. Sachs?
Here.
Mr. Texarney?
Here.
Mr. Taylor?
Here.
Mr. Boddigheimer? Mrs. Wilson?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Announcements. Are there announcements by board members or staff? Mr. Quinn, I see your hand. It's in the.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just the members of the ad hoc committee on site plan review should check their inboxes if they haven't already for a doodle poll for our follow-up meeting, which we hope to have one of the last 2 weeks of July. I don't know whether I'm stealing Mr. Lesko's thunder, but I noticed signs around town for a survey, which I think is now, is this the consumer survey or for the master plan?
Yep.
The economic development element, correct?
Yep, exactly that. So our master plan is going to have an economic development element that comes from an economic development study. And the first step to that, or one of the first steps, is this survey that's going out. The signs around town say, "Tell us what you want." You'll also see it in the newsletter, municipal newsletter, all throughout our social media. And that's really to, like I said, to guide that study. And there will be further surveys. We have an engagement hub coming out pretty soon. So we're making progress on the master plan after our second of 10 steering committee meetings. Pretty soon after this survey, we'll have a schedule of all the open houses and when it's finally going to come to the planning board and when those other surveys might be as well. But please go to princetonsurvey.org, planning board members, members of the public, and tell us what you want.
Great. And can you, I think I recall consultant team saying that this consumer survey was going to be active for 6 weeks or something like that. Do you know, and pending them getting the variety of, or the number and variety of responses. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, certainly. I believe it's till August 7th, I want to say. Ballpark, somewhere around that. It just went live yesterday, and I believe it's going to be about a month's worth. But you'll see repeatedly through our social media and council newsletter updates on that.
Mhm. And just to let folks know, there were some members of the steering committee who expressed concern about doing a survey over the summer, even 6 weeks time. And those are duly noted and well taken. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of survey results they get and the variety of folks, meaning, people who live in town versus visitors, and, age and demographic breakdown and that kind of thing. So we'll see what it turns up and take it from there, see whether or not we need to take another run at it in the fall.
Yep.
Madam Chair, I think it's worth noting that there will be a separate survey related to other elements of the master plan that will launch in the fall, I think, or not exactly September. And members of the steering committee and the master plan subcommittee will be reviewing the questions in that survey prior to it going live. So there are 2 surveys. The first is related to economic development. That's live now. So encourage your friends and neighbors and people visiting town to fill out the survey.
Yep, and if I could just add to that, to people that are worried about this survey being in the summer, it's online at princetonsurvey.org. You could take it from your home on, Witherspoon Street, from your summer home in Nantucket, from your study abroad program in China, wherever. So we really hope to get as many people as possible.
Good.
And
Okay.
again,
First, I have to get a summer home.
That's the first step. But to reiterate what Mr. Quinn said, we're looking to get residents to fill this out, as well as visitors, as well as people who want to visit. And there's different questions that'll guide you along the way. It's not just residents. It's not just people who go to the university or work in town but don't live here. But we really want representation from as many groups as we can.
Good. And my only announcement, if you could call it that, is to wish Mr. Quinn well on his Anchor House Ride for Runaways, which starts in the next couple of days and is, I'm sure, a grueling test of endurance and willpower. Thank you for doing that, Tim.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other comments from Ms. Zenon?
Yeah, so I have some questions about the master plan process, and is this a good time to bring them up?
Sure.
Yeah, so I had a chance to review one of the videos, or actually both of the videos of the steering committee meeting, and the first meeting, I guess in particular, was a little surprising because I guess there was thanks to David Cohen, there was the topic of the green building environmental sustainability element came up. And based off of the conversation that was had, it seemed like the consultant was not planning on updating that element. And I think that, in my opinion, was not really the intention of the element. I was kind of surprised to hear that that wasn't the plan. So, I mean, perhaps I misheard, but my vision for that element was that it would help start the master plan process, overhaul process, but it would then be, I guess, redone as part of the whole process. And so I'm not sure, how to necessarily provide my thoughts on that because, I'm not on the subcommittee or the steering committee. Yeah, I was just curious how that is going to work out.
Justin, can you speak to what was in the RFP and the proposal about it? I don't want to jump in and say something that might be off target.
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah. So if you read the first page, and I know Zenon, you obviously helped craft that element, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But it mentions how that element is to be used to guide all the other elements in the future. And that's why it's kind of broken down the way it is. So we're planning on using it in two ways. Instead of throwing it out after only 2 years or completely revamping it, incorporate it into each and every element. You could think about circulation or land use and how green building and sustainability affects both of those, for example. So interspersing it throughout all of the other elements and really making it a component in everything, and then also including it as an appendix so you could see where it comes from. I kind of want to do one of those things where maybe there's a little symbol or something that shows, this part of the land use element came from the green building and sustainability element.
Right. I mean, I think that, I don't know if I'm getting echo there. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's great to hear that it's going to be, incorporated into all elements. I think that was the real intention of the element. But I mean, I guess this could be for further discussion. But I mean, I felt like, once it was incorporated in all the other elements, it would then essentially go away. I mean, and it becomes sort of a historical document. And I know that, we spent a lot of time on it, and it's kind of unfortunate that, it would go away so quickly. But I mean, I think that the real goal of it was to, really start the master plan process. And then, once the ideas are in the new master plan, it would essentially not need to be redundant. It would, because I think that, a lot of the ideas would be then, in those places as opposed to in the green building and environmental sustainability element. But, I
don't think that it goes away. I don't think there's any intention to sort of divide it up and then it evaporates at all. It doesn't go away.
It would be redone essentially. So I think that, just like the problem now is that, a lot of the other elements don't really have things that are in the green building element. I think that once those elements are done, then it's going to be weird to have, a historical element that, is before the current or the new elements, if that makes sense. So, I mean, I guess we could continue this conversation, another time. David, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think that I see both sides. On the one hand, it can be very productive and in fact necessary to bludgeon readers with the same information over and over again. So redundancy may not be a bad thing, actually, in my opinion, Zenon. The flip side, of course, is that when you have things that appear scattered throughout a document and you want to make a change, then it becomes challenging to hunt down all the references and to change it everywhere that it needs to be changed. So those are the two sort of competing considerations, I think, in deciding how to move forward with this. I do think we should take it offline and, not try and deal with it as a committee of the whole with the planning board. But deal with it with the master plan group.
Yeah, I just want to raise it because I didn't really have I'm not
Yeah,
part of that
yeah.
group, so.
I got it.
But yeah, I think that, as mentioned before, it's a little weird because, in the beginning of the element, it says like, that this element, is the precursor to, the overhaul of the master plan. And if it's still part of the master plan, it just becomes a little awkward. I just think that, I saw it as sort of a way to put all those ideas in one element, because instead of, redoing the master plan earlier on. And so once we've redone the master plan, I think that element the green building element could essentially be much lighter. And, you're going to have, ideas about land use in the land use element, or ideas about the utility in the utility element. And so I think that I just was a little surprised, because I think that, it seemed like, we weren't going to do anything about it. And I wanted to make sure that, that's the way I saw it, working. So I want to let everybody know. Yeah.
Well, thanks for raising it. It was, I think Mr. Cohen's right that it's a conversation to take offline, but I feel confident that at the end of the day, you and others who are deeply invested in the green building element, as I think all of us really are, will be happy with the way it reaches into every element. And to Mr. Cohen's point, stands alone as well, because I think redundancy is a good thing too. Anyway, let's do move on. If anybody else have any questions or comments before we go to the
I wanted
next?
to advise that Mr. Bodekheimer is now with
Yes,
attending the meeting.
good, thank you. And the next item on the agenda is the minutes. Those are being tabled to the next meeting. I understand, because we're not quite finished with the various attorney reviews that are needed. And then after that, we have committee appointments. So we're reactivating, resurrecting the site plan subcommittee. And this, contrary to what I indicated in an email that I sent around, is not of something that the board will vote on. These are committee appointments, and so they're the chair's appointments. But I do want Justin taking the lead and Jerry backing up to explain what we're doing. Why reactivate the site plan subcommittee at this time? Go ahead, Justin.
Absolutely. So you may remember it's already been almost 6 months since SPRAB was disbanded, and under our municipal ordinance and under the state municipal land use law, the power to classify site plan applications as major or minor falls to the planning board or a subcommittee of the planning board. So basically, instead of having the full board have to decide on every case if it's major or minor before even hearing it, you could have a subcommittee of the board appointed by the chair, and that's what we're looking to do here. So that extra group will meet, when we get minor applications with or without variances, and they'll say, yes, we agree that this is a minor, and they can move forward, or we disagree based on the considerations in our ordinance. This is actually a major site plan based on a major detrimental effect or a combination of them, and they need to reapply as a major. So this is basically just appointing those members to meet outside of the planning board meeting and make that determination.
Yeah, so it's administrative business, but it's important administrative business. And
Justin and I just add a note.
oh, go ahead, Jerry. Yep.
Justin and I understand there is a lot of sentiment, I share it, about not having minor subdivisions and site plans, that they all should be major. And there was a discussion we had at an officers meeting little while ago about that, and I was going to look into that, and I have. And in fact, you don't have to have minor subdivisions and site plans. So we see this as an interim step until we get the authority to draft an ordinance, which makes everything a major. And the way of dealing with things which are colloquially minor, really small bore stuff, is by getting administrative waivers from that. But so that's the way we see the process moving forward. But right now, as Justin indicated, this is what the ordinance requires. We expect, and Justin and I have talked about this, that the committee will decide for a number of the applications that there's enough detrimental effects that they should be treated as majors. So I just wanted to add.
Or potential detrimental effects.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. I understand there are a couple of applications in the pipeline that need to be, they're sort of time sensitive at this point and need to be looked at. So with a few, applications or a few of those subcommittee meetings under our belts, we'll be in a better position to decide for sure whether we want to just assume that everything is major unless it is just an administrative review. But it'll be that decision will be, and the way the ordinance is drafted will be informed by the experience of this committee in the next several months.
Right, and the real issue, it really boils down to, as we talked a number of times, is do we want to have a notice in a public hearing on all applications? And if they're minor, certainly if they're colloquially minor, we don't want all the documentation that would be required for a real major, but administrative waivers are the way of going about that. And we've discussed that, but that's something to be discussed some more in a decision made and an ordinance drafted.
Yeah. So again, just to piggyback on that, what we're doing tonight is we're not changing anything in the ordinance.
Right.
We're just appointing that subcommittee.
Yes.
So, so the members of the subcommittee are Tim Quinn and myself, and Zenon Tekzarny and David Cohen. We're going to piggyback these meetings with officers' meetings so as to minimize the number of additional meetings. And then we will, of course, appoint a new subcommittee for 2023, and it may or may not be the same folks. Any questions or comments? Okay. Next up, we have discussion of an ordinance referral. This is number 2022-22, creating a new historic preservation overlay district to be known as the Prospect Avenue Historic District. Mr. Lesko.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Let me pull up a PowerPoint I have. I sent out a memo just last week about this ordinance referral. So the council has referred ordinance 2022-22 regarding the creation of a Prospect Avenue Historic District to you as the planning board for master plan consistency review. Not too dissimilar of what we've done in the past couple months with the unschool rezoning, the ADU and other structure ordinance referral as well. Here's the background on it, and this is going to sound awfully familiar to you because most of you will remember the several meetings that happened at the planning board for the companion applications from Princeton University that resulted in moving the former eating club at 91 Prospect across the street and rearranging but saving 3 Victorian houses on that side of the street to make room for the university's environmental studies and School of Environmental and Applied Sciences, ES&C's complex between Ivy Lane and Prospect Avenue. Part of the approval for the ES&C's application included Princeton University's support for a Prospect Avenue Historic District. And then the Princeton Prospect Foundation and Clifford Zink created a report and presented it at the Historic Preservation Commission last summer. Then in the fall, the Historic Preservation Commission formally supported this historic district nomination and recommended it to the planning board and the council. You also discussed the nomination at your January 6th, 2022 meeting. So again, that's just another way it's going to look familiar to you. And the ordinance before you tonight was introduced at council in June and will be voted on by them on Monday. So again, your task tonight is to discuss if ordinance 2022-22 is consistent with the Princeton Community Master Plan. And here to the left is what that district will look like in yellow, stretching from Washington Road. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
So I know stretching from Washington Road over to Murray Place. And it kind of jumps around a little to include eating clubs rather than other university non-eating club buildings, as well as the gate that's over here, the Ferris Thompson gate that used to be part of the football facility. To the right is an aerial photo. If you could see it, you might need to move your pictures out of the way. The interesting thing about this photo is that it's from last Wednesday. So here's that construction of the ES&Cs going on right now. And again, we're looking from Washington over to Murray, jumping around a little bit. Now on to the next slide. This comes directly from the memo and just staff comments on consistency with the master plan. Here are the following land use element goals that this ordinance meets. It preserves the existing character and mix of the community, preserves historic and cultural resources, and encourages historic preservation in general. Moving on specifically to the historic preservation element, and you'll see the 3 goals that this meets within that element. And like the Witherspoon-Jackson Historic District before it, the Prospect Avenue Historic District is a suggested district in the master plan. And that's this text over here to the right where it's called the Club Row Historic District. I believe this dates back to 1997, and then it was readopted in 2012. I know there were some efforts even earlier than that to make this a historic district. And then just lastly, the 2017 reexamination report states that additional historic districts should be delineated where warranted. So in conclusion, staff found that the Prospect Avenue Historic District proposed in ordinance 2022-22 is consistent with the master plan. I mean, you look to the right over here, there aren't too many other cut and dry cases like this, where it's quite literally within the master plan. And we're lucky enough to have the HPC chair on our board. If you have any questions for Julie or for myself. Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me know if you want me to go back to any of the slides or anything else.
Okay, thank you. I would just remind the board, folks probably are well aware of this. When the ES&Cs, Environmental Studies, and the School of Engineering and Applied Science project was approved, one of the conditions was that the university would support the designation of this district. So the board has, in a way, passed judgment, at least in that sense. Julie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would first like to thank Elizabeth Kim for all the work that she did with this, all the HPC hearings. I would really like to thank the Princeton Prospect Foundation because they did the heavy lifting on all the research, the reports, the nomination. It's groups like this that make the districts happen. We don't have the resources within HPC to actually do this work ourselves. And we do rely on the community for this kind of help. So really grateful for all their work. And then I'd like to thank the university for actually working towards this compromise and being, in the end, a really great partner with the municipality. And I'd like to thank a lot of the citizens that came out every single meeting and testified. So it was a very collaborative effort involving the entire community. And I'm just so pleased that we're at this point.
Thank you. Great points. Well said. Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, Julie, I think we all agree with you totally and completely. This is a major step forward. It's extremely positive. I just have one, well, need for clarification, I suppose, is the best description. I remember the legal counsel for Princeton University referring to parts of Prospect Avenue as being state and federally designated historic districts, and that as a result, there was no legal standing on the part of Princeton relying upon that status for any purpose whatsoever. And my question for clarification is, two, have we solved that state and federal designation issue? Was it ever really an issue? And is there any inconsistency between federal and state status and the ordinance?
Julie?
Can I answer that?
Please.
So the only ordinance that we can enforce is a local ordinance. So even though there's a state and federal designation, the only way our community can actually enforce historic preservation standards is through a local ordinance. So lots of buildings are designated on a state level or a federal level, but it has to be in a local district in order to have protection.
Right, but there's no inconsistency between the national and state registers.
No, there's
there's
no inconsistency.
Mr. Cohen?
I
Excuse me, Mr. Taylor, I assume that answered your question.
Completely, thank you.
Okay, great. David?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a little factoid that I learned during this process, which is that if a public project is undertaken in, I think in the federal historic district,
Mhm.
that it does have restrictions and enforceable, requirements that would be imposed on it, but private property projects do not.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the one area where the national designation has.
Its teeth.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Before I open up the meeting for public comment, are there any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, since this is an ordinance referral for consistency with the master plan, we're inviting comments from the public. I see Clifford Zink has his hand up, and anybody else. So Carrie, you can bring Mr. Zink over. Anybody else who'd like to speak, please raise your hand. We are, as I mentioned before in the opening statement, enforcing that 3-minute rule. So thank you for your cooperation.
And if I just
And
may-
I think, I'm sorry, Jerry, I think that Justin has the timer that he'll put up. Go ahead, Mr. Muller. Were you going to swear in Mr. Zink or say that?
No, I was, in fact, that was going to be my point, that I know the public is used to seeing people in the public sworn in. That would be during formal hearings on applications for development, the master plan. But this is not in that category, and there is no swearing in.
Okay, Justin, do you have the clock ready?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Mr. Zink. Welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Thank you, Julie, for that summary of all the people that contributed to this. Mr. Taylor, just to clarify one thing, the 3 historic houses on the north side of Prospect Avenue are not in the National Register Historic District. And part of the agreement with Princeton University specifies that when the court clubhouse is moved to that location, that it and the 3 historic buildings will all be added to the Princeton Historic District. So all the buildings, and also the Ferris Thompson Wall will be added to the historic district. So then the local historic district will be in line with the buildings that are on Prospect Avenue in the National Register District. So I'd like to thank people in addition to Julie. Obviously, Elizabeth has done a great job. I have to thank Michael Laplace, who throughout this process was very supportive and drafted the ordinance very conscientiously just before he left. Justin picked up the baton and has done a great job moving this through the various steps forward. Mia has really kept a focus on this on the municipal level, Ms. Sachs, to make sure that it gets through all the various steps that has to be done. So I really like to thank you, Mia, for keeping a focus on this. And then all the people that really worked hard to make this happen. Princeton Prospect Foundation, all the neighbors that spoke, people that wrote letters. I think it was a real groundswell of community support for protecting this community resource, even though most of it's private property. It's a major streetscape in town. And so this historic district, the purpose of it will not be to freeze Prospect Avenue the way it is, but rather to manage change in the future so that the municipality and the HPC and the planning board has some input when design changes are proposed. So I thank everybody who participated in this, and I look forward to hopefully this being approved by council on Monday. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zink. Nobody worked harder than you did. We're all in your debt.
Thank you.
Are there other members of the public who wish to speak on this? I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll close the meeting to public comment. And if there are any further comments, or if a member of the board would like to make a motion on a finding of consistency with the master plan, this would be a good time to do it. Mr. Quinn, I see your hand up.
I will so move that the ordinance is consistent with the master plan.
Second.
Okay.
Moved by Mr. Quinn, seconded by Mr. McGowan.
And Tim, I take it as part of that motion that the board recommends adoption.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Carrie, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Capizoli,
Yes.
Mr. Chow,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Mr. McGowan,
Yes.
Mr. Quinn,
Yes.
Ms. Sachs,
Yes.
Mr. Texarney,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Mrs. Wilson.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up, we have a hearing, West Windsor Real Estate. This is continued from February 17th, 2022. Preliminary and final major site plan and final subdivision, 176, 182, and 188 Bayard Lane, block 6802, lots 44, 45, and 46. This is file number P 2121-027P/SPF. And Carrie, can you let us know whether or not Councilwoman Sachs attended the February meeting?
I checked the agenda for that night, and yes, everyone was present.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify, it's not that I don't remember.
Hey.
I thought that there was a second hearing, and I don't
Ah.
remember being present at a second hearing. So if there was a second hearing, either I wasn't there, or even more scary, I have no memory of it. So if in fact there was not a second hearing, then that's a big relief, because my not remembering it is a factor of it not having occurred. So
Well, in fact, the February hearing was continued to May 5th. But at that point, there had been discussions between the engineers on both sides. We thought it was inappropriate to have a discussion that night. So we didn't have any discussion. We just carried it again from May 5th to tonight.
okay, so I did even remember that there was supposed to be a second hearing, but it didn't take place. Okay,
Right.
all right, then I'm eligible
Actually,
Jeannie, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So actually, that's a good segue for asking the question, where were we? My recollection is that the crux of the issue that needed to be dealt with and that took some time to resolve was stormwater management. So between Mr. Lesko and Mr. Purcell, can the two of you sort of set the table and then we will invite the applicant to let us know what's happened on their end?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's best that I do so. Jerry, would you like to swear me in?
Jim, you were sworn in previously, right?
Oh, correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. Over the last couple of months, we have been working very closely with the applicant's engineer to ensure that the stormwater management on the project meets our stormwater control ordinance. If you recall, they had two different drainage areas, one draining to the rear of the property that drained to a detention basin, a bioretention basin, sorry, green infrastructure. And then they had quantity control that was toward Route 206, the front of the property, that was an underground detention system. That did not meet the requirements of green infrastructure. So we worked carefully with the applicant's engineer, and they have now come up with a design that takes almost all of the drainage from the site to the rear of the property through green infrastructure. And as soon as they submit us a new report, we are confident that they have met the requirements of stormwater control ordinances. And I think I would like to turn it over to their presentation as to the changes that they've made to make this a better project in terms of managing runoff.
Good evening, Madam Chair, if I may.
Great. Yes, please go right ahead, Mr. Krumholtz.
Yes, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Board. My name again is Scott Krumholtz. If you recall, we were here back in February, and without reiterating everything that's been said thus far, I'm just going to pass the baton immediately to Mr. Wayne Ingram. I believe he was already sworn in,
Right.
and recognized as an expert. If Mr. Ingram can review the plans from our perspective and then answer any board questions, I believe that would be the most expeditious way to proceed.
Okay, Mr. Ingram?
Great, thank you. If I can, I'll just share my screen. And this is the same exhibit from the last hearing. I just wanted to, give you something for reference. And Mr. Purcell did a great job explaining what we did here. So basically the issue was that we have a very small drainage area which heads to the roadway, and it becomes very difficult to manage it because you're trying to meet criteria based on a very low amount of water to begin with. But what we, in consultation with the board engineers, we came up with a scheme basically where we're able to direct more water to the rear of the site and the bioretention basin that we have back there. And by doing so and making some slight changes to what we propose in the front, we're able to remove enough area that the front area can therefore meet the requirements without its own separate underground system to store the water. So essentially what that means is we maintain the subsurface system in the driveway that directs its excess water to the rear bioretention basin. And in the front, we're installing a retaining wall between the driveway and the street, which is what's picking up the grade, allowing us to send that water to the back. It's not a large retaining wall, but somewhere between 0 to 3.5 feet, I believe. We removed 2 of the sidewalks between the homes and the street sidewalk. So we're maintaining the one in the center, removing the one on each of the other properties. We were able to do the calculations such that we're still providing the upgraded sidewalk along the frontage. And Therefore, because we don't have or need a stormwater management system now for this small drainage area in the front, the added benefit to this is that we can attempt to save more existing landscaping along the frontage. And it allows us also to, where we still have to remove it because of grading and other reasons, we can now replant those areas. Whereas before, because of the underground system, we were not able to do so. So, in essence, the layout is the same, the driveway is the same. We have removed the stormwater system, and at the end of the day, we have the opportunity for more landscaping along the frontage. So that's really the crux of the changes that occurred. Certainly want to thank the board professionals for helping us work through that, which was quite a challenging exercise. But I think that really stemmed from the plan's desire here to minimize the disturbance and save as much as we could, is what really created a lot of the difficulty managing that small drainage area.
Excuse me, Wayne, you're still showing the prior plan. Do you have,
Yes.
do you have the
Yeah, I
new
can-
plan to show?
Yeah, I don't have an exhibit for it because, again, very little changed. But this was a sheet that was submitted with our most recent revision. What's a change you'll know is here in the corner of the property is where we previously had that underground system. So that's been removed. The underground systems under the driveways now just direct that water to the bio basin. And you see again the main change, just swap between the two is you see these two walkways have been removed. And again, that's back behind a retaining wall, which will help us maintain that grade on the low side, perhaps save some additional landscaping. And now because we don't have that system there, we can replant the frontage between that retaining wall and the sidewalk. That's really the only change that you can physically observe between the plans. The rest of it really just involved the calculations and stormwater files that we've been working on.
Wayne, can you identify what sheet that is, just for the record?
That's sheet 8 of 25. We called it drainage plan option B.
Okay, thank you.
Do I understand correctly that you're able to avoid removing a lot more trees along the frontage of 206? Is that correct?
Right. So whereas we needed to remove all of these trees to accommodate that stormwater system, we now have the ability to save them, if they're in good condition, and, as long as we're not, compromising the root structure, which, we don't want to promise you we can save something we can't, but it is our intention to save every tree that reasonably can be accommodated. And adding this retaining wall improves our ability to do that, because now we don't need to raise the grade or lower it around those trees or the root structures.
Right. Well, that will make a big difference in a lot of ways. I mean, visually, obviously, but this does look like a really big improvement over your previous plan. So it looks like time well spent. Are there other questions for Mr. Ingram from board members? Mr. Cohen?
Yeah, so the way you describe it, it makes it sound like more stormwater is flowing to the rear, but the bioretention basin itself sort of looks smaller. I mean, I can't tell. Obviously, I don't have a scale. But can you tell us, did you have to enlarge the bioretention basin to accommodate existing flow based on this redesign?
Well, so one of the other major things that we spoke to Mr. Scooping about, and we really kind of made this change in the prior revision when we pulled off the last meeting. It was really the only, our latest issue was really this front drainage area. But we made some revisions at that time. The size is very similar. I mean, we did make some minor adjustments to it, but mainly what his concern was back there was that we analyze not just the runoff from our site, but look at the drainage that was coming upstream from off properties and coming past and through our site. So we went through those iterations. We provided those calculations to his satisfaction there. The reason you're not, I mean, we obviously did make some changes, but they're fairly minimal to that basin. The rest was really, the change was really in taking some area away from the front and adjusting the basins that were under the driveways. There were some changes there, but you know, as different as this sounds, it really was very minimal changes, because the problem was, we're not in the front, we weren't talking about a lot of water. It was very small, which was actually the difficulty. How do you make a very, you know, how do you cut down a very small number to begin with to meet certain criteria? So it's really slight tweaks to the drainage areas that actually resulted in us now being in compliance. You know, the rules are such that, you know, certain things don't give you leeway. So, you know, making small changes like that, you know, was just what we needed to do to, you know, to get this to meet the requirements.
And can you just tell us a little more about what you discovered when you looked at the flow of water from off this property coming through the property? What did you discover in that investigation?
So I'm going to shift over to a sheet which was also submitted. It's proposed drainage area plan 2 of 2.
And
you know, this
what sheet number is that, Wayne?
2 of 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Now, so at this point, you know, we're worried less about the drainage from our property, but looking at the overall drainage that's coming through our property, which is just as important. So, you know, for instance, I'll take the highest, you know, runoff rate in the 100-year storm, basically 15.1 CFS. We're cutting that down now with our proposal to 14.2, which doesn't seem like a lot, but what the calculation showed us was a lot of the water that's coming through us is not from our property, it's from the other properties upstream. You can kind of see that in the drainage area here. This dashed line is showing all of the grading that's coming through our lot. And you can see that it's 3 or 4 times what we're actually producing on our property. So we are providing in that storm, we're reducing our runoff to 80% of the existing. It's all the rest of this water that's still is bypassing the site. So, you know, we are producing a reasonable decrease in runoff from our site, you know, dropping our runoff by 20%. But essentially, these are the numbers that, you know, you're going to see now because of those off-site contributing areas. So, you know, you can see here again, 2-year storm is going from 3.9 CFS to 3.2. The 10-year from 7.6 to 6.35. So, you know, reasonable reductions given the, you know, what's being done on the site. And again, I think, you know, we reduced it as much as we needed to. And part of that is because we're trying to preserve the natural environment. You know, we didn't obliterate the wetland complex back there any more than we needed to. You know, if we were to, you know, remove it and build, you know, a giant basin, you know, I mean, that could have other impacts, but, you know, we're trying to deal with a lot of competing desires here, you know, minimize our disturbance, improve the landscaping while also meeting the stormwater requirements. And it was really just finding a balancing act between those, you know, different interests.
Mr. Texarney?
Yeah, so I'm just curious if you analyzed like potentially runoff from the street, like and I mean, it's a difficult thing to analyze, but from what I understand, I live not too far from this location, and I know that stormwater inlet gets backed up, and I think that a lot of the flooding on this site in particular actually comes from the road, and I don't know if that was considered, but I mean, for me, I think a major concern is that, you know, these properties are going to be flooded. So, I mean, I'm just curious to hear how you plan on dealing with potentially significantly more water coming into this site than you've modeled, because you're just looking at the landscape around and behind it, but you're not really looking at the water that's coming from the neighborhood in front of it.
I mean, we've now analyzed everything that's coming through our property from upstream sources so that, you know, we're being protective of our downstream neighbors. In terms of anything from the roadway, you know, part of this and the point of the retaining wall is we're lifting up the center of our site where the development's occurring so that we can reduce our drainage area to that street and its drainage infrastructure such that we don't really have any alteration at all to the water that's, going out to the roadway. I mean, if there's flooding within the roadway, it's not going to cause flooding on our property, specifically because we're raising our site, such that the improvements are, higher in grade, and that's what's allowing us to pitch them to the rear. So, now we're basically building up the center of the site, 2 or 3 feet higher than it currently is.
Okay. So you're saying that you're going to be higher than the road, and therefore, and there's a retaining wall, and therefore that water won't go onto the site where the homes are.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm just curious. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's really hard to really fully understand. I mean, in this situation, I think that it might potentially create like a lake in front, or it might, drain properly and it might improve the drainage. I don't know, but it worries me. I mean, are these units going to have basements?
Are we proposing basements?
Yes, I believe they are planned to have basements. That's correct.
But again, these are lifted. If you look at the inlet in the road, we're at a 140.8. The home is at a 146, which again, could even adjust a little bit. But we've gotten ourselves higher than the groundwater table. We've analyzed the mounding of groundwater. It will not be impactful of the our own homes or any nearby. We have provided that analysis. The front of our our wall is at a 142, so we're a foot and a half higher than the basin in the roadway, which is retained within the street. So unless that road is feet underwater, which I think at that point we all have bigger problems, but that's not going to be impactful of anything we're doing here.
Okay. All right, that's it for me for now.
I saw Mr. Chow's hand up, although I don't see it anymore, and I see Mr. Taylor's as well. Phil, did you have anything?
I was just trying to understand the water flow that Xenon had, the issues that Xenon had raised, and I'm just trying to understand whether it's kind of passing the buck to the next property, which direction is that, to the north or to the left of the drawing?
So
What's
again,
the risk to that property to the left?
There are no risks. I mean, that was the whole purpose of why we've been at this for 6 months with your professionals. This breaks down our upstream drainage area, our drainage area, and what goes to the street. And basically, you can see the only thing that goes to the front yard is everything in front of that retaining wall and this one little corner of the property, which is less area than goes there today. And all of the analysis, I mean, we've expanded our topography here to cover well beyond the project site to figure out all of that water that's going. And again, I feel confident at this point, in working with Mr. Scupian, that he's satisfied that we're producing the required reductions in runoff to that major drainage area, to those downstream properties. We're not saying in it by any means that we are removing the drainage that comes to the neighbors, but what our contribution to that drainage will be reduced by 50, 70 to 50, 75, and 80% of existing flows under the 210 and 100 design storms, which, I mean, those are pretty substantial reductions.
So if I could just,
well, before you chime in, Mr. Rabin, Mr. Taylor,
Yeah.
why don't you pose your question?
Yeah, an observation and for comment and a question. Mr. Ingham, I'm impressed with the progress that you've clearly made. I do remember in our February meeting that there were at least 3 or 4 impassioned neighbors who described the flood conditions under which they operate. They were deeply concerned. Have you had discussions? Are these neighbors aware of the progress that you've made, and that in fact, it would appear, your argument, that while there will still be drainage and they may have flood problems, it will not be a function of this property as a cause. So that's for comment. And secondly, I remember talking with you and your colleagues in February about the complexity of what's being established. There are 3 single-family homes, and we talked about the operation and management plan. How do we keep all of this properly managed, under control, and doing what it's set out to do correctly?
So, I mean, we have not reached out specifically to the owners. I think, Mr. Scupian, was understanding of what their concerns were and what they raised. And that goes to, all of the requests and questions we've received from him, over the last, 4 or 5 months as we worked through this. So that was part of his justification for asking for all of this offsite drainage information, was for us to really establish these conditions. We've gone through many iterations with him. He's even done his own analysis of what we've provided. He's recreated it to give himself a level of comfort that what we're analyzing here is accurate, and producing the reductions that we're talking about. So, we've modeled this exactly as he's requested. We're factoring in the low points and wetlands on the property, the surface conditions, the times that it takes runoff to migrate through the property. That's all been, put into this, into this model here, to provide these, these reductions. So, our goal was really to satisfy him, because he speaks to the, to the board and to the municipality as to those concerns.
Could I,
with regard to
on that
maintenance,
point, could I just, Wayne, if I could interrupt, and Madam Chair, if I could be recognized on the point?
Mr. Rabin, are you the property owner?
Yes,
Go ahead.
thank you. Yeah, Mr. Taylor, I have not spoken directly to any of the neighbors. I did address them in my comments at the previous meeting in February, both at the beginning and the end. And my point tonight is we heard those comments, and I took them very seriously. And the direction that I understood from our February meeting and the direction that I gave to the experts that have created this plan was to ensure that we were accepting water from the surrounding properties and that the runoff was going to be reduced. And I wanted to make that representation tonight to not only this board, but to the neighbors, that we were building responsibly and that we understood the concern and that we had addressed it. And that really has been the focus of our conversations. And we've had many, I think by my count, we had 7 Zoom calls and a number of exchanges with the experts just to ensure that we could make that representation to this group tonight. So I think we've done it, and we could not have done it without close cooperation from the experts. And I don't pretend to understand it well enough to have a conversation about it, but those were the guiding principles that we understood from our meeting and that we carried forward into tonight's discussion.
and also, so to your second question about maintenance, this proposal is actually simpler than the last one. By making the changes that we did, we were able to eliminate an additional underground system and treatment device. Because I think we can all agree that simplifying this is going to aid in maintenance. Obviously we have shared facilities, the underground system, fairly easy to maintain. It's simplistic in its design. We have drainage pipes. Really tried to minimize those as well, find the shortest distances that accomplish the goals. And then we have the above ground, bioinfiltration basin. And, the nice thing about that is, again, it's visible. So, you can always see when there's an issue. Just like any project, whether it's residential or commercial, you have a recorded maintenance, requirements. There's follow-up, there's, mandates for, for periodic maintenance. But I also think that, locating this behind one of the homes is really going to ensure that, because, nobody's going to want to have a problem in their backyard. If they see that problem, they're going to address it and do what they're required to do, under those, filed maintenance documents.
Well, if I may,
Thank you.
add, I know there was discussion at the last meeting about creation of a homeowners association to basically spearhead the maintenance. Is that something that's acceptable to the applicant?
Yes, it is. Yes, we were planning that.
Okay, great,
for common area maintenance, but also specifically for this issue as well.
great, thank you.
Mr. Dobromirsky,
Yes, thank you.
were you sworn in on this application before?
Yes, I testified. at the
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just had a quick question for Mr. Ingram, I believe. And I appreciated the effort that went into resolving all this. But before you finalize where the stormwater is and all that, have you contemplated the underground utility services to each of the houses and how that's going to fit through here, and or to see if you can do everything you're trying to do and save trees and get the stormwater and get those utilities in?
Yep, and again, as I stated before, as it goes to the design, it also goes to utilities. This, I think, is a simpler plan than the last one because we've removed one of the largest impediments, which was that additional system in the front yard. So, as you can see in this diagram, we have these two underground systems and they're separated. We have the ability to, place the utilities, between all of those, so there's no interference. We will certainly attempt to place, the individual utilities to the street around the significant trees, when we do those final placements, to try and save, what we can and be least impactful, but it's not really going to change, from what the prior design was because, really we just removed one of the largest impediments.
I appreciate that. Is there any wiggle room if needed for those front underground systems, if needed, to find the gap?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, we could always shift it a little bit this way or that, in small increments, to create, distances needed for utilities, but it's the sizes that are really the important factor here.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ingram, can you point out where the manufactured treatment device is located?
It used to be located at the front over here. Now we have, again, a simplified system. We have two manholes, one for each system, a couple inlet collection devices. But the manufactured treatment system that we used to have up here at the corner has now been removed because now we don't have any additional dirty impervious going to the front at all. So,
Okay.
The amount that drains to the front is less than currently drains. Therefore, we've reduced the, water quality loading on that front drainage area.
Okay, I misunderstood or must have misinterpreted part of Mr. Scupian's memo. He wrote stormwater quality control for this portion of the site. That is the portion that drains toward Bayard. Will be provided by a small green infrastructure manufactured treatment device.
Right, and that was the prior iteration before the board when we had that upfront system. So that was providing our water quality treatment. And the whole issue revolved around the fact that underground systems that we had are no longer considered green infrastructure. So we met water quality,
Right.
we could not meet water quantity. And now because we've reduced that drainage area, we don't require either.
Okay, so, but this is his memo from yesterday, and he's talking about proposed stormwater option B. Isn't that what we're
That is what
looking at
this
here?
is drainage plan B. I mean, again,
Okay.
that must just be,
So-
a remnant of the prior one, but
Okay.
again, we're happy to
Fair
provide
enough.
any water quality he wants, but this is definitely simplified.
Madam
Yeah,
Chair,
that was part of my concern was that, which I guess is a moot point, but that if there's a homeowner association, it's important for them to understand the maintenance requirements of a manufactured treatment device, but you're saying there isn't one, so they don't need to understand that. But it can be a fairly expensive annual
Yep. And every
maintenance
one of these,
requirement.
yeah, we agree. And every one of these components of these systems, is going to be individually mapped out in that maintenance plan with the individual requirements, of it. So it's going to be very explicit with, what those maintenance requirements are, where they're located, designating somebody who can provide the maintenance, all of those requirements.
Okay.
Louise,
Mr.
Louise, could I just ask, your reference to Joe's report, could you tell me what section that was?
It was on page 2, the third paragraph. the paragraph that begins as discussed
Oh, okay.
at our meetings.
Yeah, right.
And I started underlining about halfway through that paragraph. I see Mr. Cohen's hand up.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask a question about the removed sidewalks for the two houses on either side. I assume that that removal was somehow necessary to, get rid of the impervious coverage and make the stormwater system work. I'm a little uncomfortable not having a sidewalk for each house to get there from the street. Trying to imagine people in the northmost house walking south for 150 feet to get to a sidewalk that belongs to another homeowner, and then going out to the street to walk left and get to Mountain Ave, the crossing to Community Park for Mountain Ave, that sort of thing. So can you tell us, you really need to get rid of those sidewalks?
I mean, I believe we do, because, it was not our first desire, obviously, but, the issue here is we were dealing with as I said, these very extremely small drainage areas, and to hit the requirements, it's really unfortunate because, the rules are so strict that they don't allow us deviations from some of these things. We don't want to remove it, but, to hit the numbers we need to hit, it's just the reality. If we were permitted to do a 4-foot, sidewalk in the front rather than 5, I'd have the square footage to get it done. But, we have competing interests of trying to provide an overall improvement to the roadway and the sidewalk that everyone gets to access, that unfortunately becomes, something that's lost. I don't really see it as being very impactful to how the properties are used. The driveway itself is a common, driveway and access easement that exists between the lots. That's for somebody on a bike, somebody in a car, somebody walking. So they have the ability to do, any mode of transportation down that driveway. And, we have the centrally located walkway, which, creates fairly minimal distance between this last house and its location. And then obviously, if you're the first house, you could either choose to go left and go to that central point, or you just walk down the driveway, which, and again, if you're going that way, it could be even a little closer for you. But, the distances we're talking about are not, hundreds and hundreds of feet. It's a pretty small distance in any regard.
Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead,
If I
Jim.
may, just on that point alone, there are crosswalks at Birch Avenue and Lee Avenue. And there are no crosswalks until you get to Mountain Avenue. So for the northern home, I consider it safer for them to actually go to this central crossing, this central walkway, to cross at Birch Avenue, because they would be tempted to cross where there is no crosswalk, because the entrance to the park is directly across the street from where the new sidewalk ends. And that's a very dangerous place to cross Route 206. So I was kind of happy to see what they were doing here, centralizing the pedestrians. So just my professional opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm
Yeah,
convinced.
thank you for that. That's helpful. Other questions from board members of Mr. Ingram or Mr. Rabin? And thank you for your comments too, Mr. Rabin. Seeing none, are there questions from members of the public for Mr. Ingram? These are not the general question or general comments when all is said and done. I'm wondering if people have questions specifically for the applicant's engineer, Mr. Ingram. I'm not seeing any hands go up. Okay. Mr. Krumholtz, do you have any other witnesses to?
I believe, Madam Chair, that this was the last remaining issue from our February meeting. If the board needs to know anything else, certainly we have a number of people here today.
I see that you do.
Yeah.
Mr. Cohen,
Yeah, if you can just refresh my memory, Mr. Krumholtz, is this a conforming application or are there variances required?
No, it's fully conforming.
Okay.
And just to follow up on that, is the applicant going to be building the homes, or is it just subdividing and a different builder will build the homes?
So West Windsor Real Estate is a company owned by myself and my father. I hire professionals to develop, and Mike Lyons is on the call. Lyons Construction. He's done a number of homes in Princeton. So it's my intention to stay through to the end of the project, and Mike will be my GC.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know that this is kind of getting into the buildings, but is there any plans to build the buildings in a certain way, in terms of green building, utilizing solar, electrifying heating systems, so on, and EV, charging infrastructure? Is there going to be level 2 EV charging?
Thanks. That question did come up, and unfortunately, Dan Ward is on a board in another town, so he's the architect for the project, and he sent me a list of green building components that we're going to incorporate. LED lighting throughout, exterior lights to be dark sky compliant, solar ready roof, and I'll talk about that in a minute. All installed appliances will be electric. We will not connect to gas, although I think we're going to have the gas service available if the homeowner insists upon it. There will be 2 EV chargers in the garages, electric HVAC systems using heat pumps, smart thermostats. Will avoid thermal bridges in the thermal envelope, and someone else is going to have to explain what that means. Energy Star windows, U factor of 0.3 or better, passive house standards for insulation, R41.8 in the walls, R57 in the ceilings. We looked at Tesla roofs. We took an estimate on the cost of a Tesla roof. After federal rebates, it's $50,000 per house. So that's going to be an option that the homeowner will have to select.
Okay.
Howard, let me ask you, is that in a form that it could be submitted to the board as an exhibit?
Sure, I can send that to you, Jerry. It was just an email between Dan and I, but I can make that a list.
Okay, that'd be
and
great.
submit
And why
it to
don't
you.
we, oh, great, and then we'll treat that as exhibit A3. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.
yes, thanks. And
Well,
thanks
that's good to
for
hear. Good to
questions,
hear.
Zenon.
Good to hear that the buildings will be built in a green fashion, and you're doing all that stuff. So
Yeah. Other members of the board have questions at all for Mr. Ingram, Mr. Rabin, Mr. Krumholtz? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Are there members of the public who have general comments they'd like to make about this application? I am not seeing any hands go up among members of attendees. We do have 9 people, for the record, 9 people attending as observers. No hands going up, so I'll close the meeting to public comment. Any final comments or a motion from any board members? Mr. Quinn and then Mr. Texarney.
Zenon was ahead of me, so.
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm in the wrong, I'm in the go ahead, Zenon.
yeah, well, so I don't know if I can't even remember if we talked about this last time, but I guess I don't know if it's officially designated as wetland, but I know a large portion of the site is wetland-ish. And also, I think that I'm familiar with the site, and the property is kind of dilapidated. So I think that improving it could be a good thing. But I also am concerned that it's going to be lawn and non-native species and landscaping. And so I'm just curious if the applicant can speak to how it's going to be landscaped as well, if there's going to be any native species used, and also terms of this retention basin, you know, if there's going to be any specific, you know, wetlandish type of plants being used.
So wait, yeah, just if you can put a photograph up of, I like that slide 2 that we were looking at earlier. I mean, not sure that's the one.
I mean, this is was our landscaping plan originally, which again, you know, you're correct. I mean, there is a wetland. We have a DEP permit to fill a portion of the wetland. And I think what I tried to make clear is we could have filled, you know, a lot more of it. But, you know, the proposal that we had and what we have a permit for was to preserve a good portion of that wetland, trying only to really go into its buffers in order to maintain it as much as possible. So, you know, you're not going to see an excessive lawn area here. We're maintaining that wetland area extensively throughout the site. You have the bio basin, which has its own, you know, seed mix and requirements, which are, you know, native and in accordance with the BMP manual. We have additional trees and landscaping on the perimeter, you know, your obvious, you know, landscaping around the structures. And then whereas we did have, you know, significant landscaping up here, which can only actually increase now that we don't have what you see here, this long gray line here through the top. That was our basin that we've since been able to remove. That will allow us to maintain more of the existing landscaping and provide additional opportunities to enhance that where applicable. So, you know, we did have an extensive landscaping plan with, you know, many, you know, native species, you know, to it. We had a specified basin mixture, bioretention, you know, planting requirements and species. It really was, in my opinion, an extensive plan done to provide those kind of things.
And that vegetation mix and those plantings were reviewed with Dan and someone else from the township. But I just wanted to say that there's a limit of disturbance at the rear of the property based upon the DEP permit. So, and then the new retaining wall at the front, in front of the driveway, we're really treating as a limit of disturbance. So we've minimized, you know, the disturbance of the existing site to just that building envelope to the center, basically 1/3. And then we have pretty strict instructions about which plantings, and I think Jim was active in that as well, Purcell, in terms of which plantings we were permitted to bring into the site. And we're clearly going to respect that.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, in terms of what Howard just said, is there a writing which provides us instructions on what kind of plantings can be used?
There is a specific list of bioretention types of plants that they were instructed to use based on Rutgers University's research.
Okay, should we make that as an exhibit or?
No, I believe it's actually on the plans at this point.
Oh, okay.
And I trust that the trees that are planted, and I reiterate that the removal of this basin in front to allow for more, that allows for more of the trees right along 206 to be retained, is a really big deal. It really transforms the way that site will look. And it provides for much more privacy and I think a nicer environment for the new homeowners as well. But will any trees that are planted be native species? Are you testifying to that?
I think we can agree to that.
Yeah. Thank you.
And if I may, I would suggest that this project be subject to landscape subcommittee review.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. You took the words right out of my mouth. So that'll just make the review that much quicker. But yes, that's a good condition to put in there. So Zenon, thanks for taking us into the landscape realm. Mr. Quinn?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Before I make my comments, I noticed 2 hands went up in the attendees queue. So I wonder if we should consider reopening the public hearing.
Yeah. Thanks.
And then
I
I'll
did
make
not
my
notice
comments after that.
Okay. So I see two members of the public, Anissa Mealy, if I'm pronouncing your name properly, and Darren Mealy. If anybody else who is an attendee in the meeting wishes to make public comment, now is the time that you need to raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand icon or pressing *9 if you're calling in. I don't think anybody's calling in by phone. Okay, and so Mr. Mealy, am I pronouncing your name properly? You can unmute yourself.
Okay, yes, Darren Neely, hopefully you hear me.
Yes, so Mr. Mueller will swear you in and then our 3-minute clock will start. So you'll have those 3 minutes for your comments, and then after you, well, now there's another Darren Mealy with hand raised. Do you have someone else in your household?
Yeah, that's my wife, so I'm speaking on her behalf as well, so, yeah.
Okay, and then after that, Mr. Charles Roth. Mr. Mueller?
If you could raise your right hand.
Okay,
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give be the truth?
I do.
So sworn or affirmed. And your first name is Darren. How do you spell that?
Daren.
Okay. Thank you. And that's M-E-L-E?
That's correct.
I thank you.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, but basically, we're a resident at 49 Wilson Road. Our property is right on that wetland. It's on this, we talk about the wetland. The wetland is a very isolated wetland, and around that wetland are a lot of properties, including ours. So the running, water to that or using the wetland as a sponge would only create some issues for all the adjacent properties. So major concern is that this runoff works its way to the retention, and it's basically my focus is to use this forum to document our current conditions. Our current conditions, which we submitted a photo to the town. We do not have standing water in our backyard on the heavy rain. We do not have a wetland situation in our backyard. And that's why I like to use this form to document that should I need to pursue remedies as this the project progresses and our situation changes. I know the intentions are all well by all parties to condemn, but nature is a tricky thing, and things will go as they may, and all our great plans might just go down the chute. So I do want to use this forum to document that. How much we would like to be involved in making sure that things go according to plan. I know on a major project of this size, there are quality assurance guarantees. I like to see what the financial obligations are from the stakeholders, the GC and the developers, to make sure that should the wheels come off financially, the taxpayers aren't left in a lurch here to what's happening in the back. Because it's basements, it's money involved, it's flooding all around us. So these are concerns we have. I know I submitted the documentation on our current conditions on our photos, and I leave it in the town's hands and the experts' hands to make sure that water either stays in that wetland or runs to the retention basin. But if it moves to everyone else because of this disturbance, we'll be all seeking remedy on that. So I appreciate your time. Good luck with everything, and we look forward to following it, making sure everybody stays on focus. Because a lot of things make the plans, they're in writing. Do they get actually transferred to the site in real life, in real time? It's questionable, so we would like to monitor that. Thank you for your time, and have a good evening.
Mr. Purcell, could you speak briefly to performance guarantees?
Yes, a performance guarantee is required for the construction of any improvements that are going to be dedicated to the public. There are very few improvements on this project that are being dedicated to the public. The performance guarantee will only be based on what's within the public right-of-way, which is the enhanced sidewalk and possibly the driveway apron. It'll be a very small performance guarantee.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that was a change in the law about 3 or 4 years ago that we in the business were not happy with. They do not give us the clout that we used to have to make sure that developments were constructed in conformance with plans if they're only for private uses.
Now, Jim, peripheral plantings also subject to performance guarantees. Are there any that would be?
Landscape buffering, so we could include that in the system.
Jim, my understanding was that in connection with a wetland, major development on a wetland performance guarantee vis-a-vis the wetland, but you think that that's not as applicable? I was in the wetland NGA DEP.
No, unfortunately, no.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Hands are tied.
Mr. Roth?
Hello.
Hi, welcome. Mr. Mueller will swear you in.
Mr. Ross has already been sworn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, I spoke at the February meeting. And so, yeah, I reside at 22 Duffield Place. And so that is the property that's in the corner where the bioretention basin that we've heard a lot about is. And so obviously my concern is, what if something goes wrong with this bioretention basin? Then what you're essentially doing is directing all of the water towards my property. And so kind of associated with that, my concern is, is this going to be maintained? So as the previous speaker mentioned, there's always the plans that it's going to be maintained, but are the properties going to be occupied? So there's been difficulty in keeping properties in this area occupied. You'll look that there's a new for sale sign for the first property on Buyer Lane, the old Buyer Lane, right next to the property that's seeking to be developed here. And so if these properties that are now built and then, they're supposed to be a homeowners association, but if they're not homeowners or all the homeowners, are these things going to happen? And so, so yes, obviously I'm very concerned. What if, essentially, what if something goes wrong here? I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for that question. I'm going to turn again to you, Mr. Purcell. Under the town's MS4 permit, what obligation does Princeton have, if any, to make sure that maybe it has nothing to do with the MS4 permit, but I think that it does, to make sure that that the stormwater management system on the property is functioning? And then maybe after you speak, Mr. Rabin or Mr. Krumholz can speak to whether these homes will be built before there are buyers for them.
Okay, so it is somewhat tied to our MS4 permit, which is the municipal separate storm sewer system permit, MS4 for short. In that our ordinances have to conform to certain requirements that we manage all of the stormwater within our municipality to a certain extent. So private stormwater management systems have to be deed restricted, and they have to be maintained, and maintenance has to be performed on them, and reports provided to the municipality on a yearly basis. And in the case of them not being maintained, the municipality does have the ability, after sufficient notice and legal notice, to go in and repair and modify. So that is not a concern. It shouldn't be a concern. The municipality will ensure that the homeowners association does what they need to do, and if they don't, we'll go in and do it and charge them back for the efforts.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rabin, do you want to speak to whether you plan to build the houses and then find buyers, or find buyers and then build the houses? Homes, I should say.
Yeah, thanks. well, I'm gonna own these homes until they're sold. I plan to start construction right away. And so I don't imagine there'll be a day that these homes are sold and not subject to an HOA.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, I don't know precisely how that timeline is going to play out, but it's my expectation that there'll be people interested in purchasing these homes pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chow, I saw your hand up, but now it's down. So your question was asked and answered, maybe?
Yeah, it was, yeah. That you got a homeowners association responsible for that whole drainage system, right? It's all connected, so all three properties need to be responsible.
That's
Right.
correct. There will be a homeowners association. There'll be a master deed that will be filed.
Mr. Cohen,
I don't know if this is a question for Mr. Purcell or for Mr. Ingram, but you know, in reference to Mr. Roth's concerns, I guess, you know, the stormwater system is designed for the 10, the 25 and the 100-year storm, right? Or the 2 and the 10 and the 100, I don't remember. But what about the 500-year storm? When the system is overwhelmed, I guess the question I want to ask is, will it still be generating less runoff from the property than if these houses were not built and if the stormwater system was not built? Is that something that one can say with some confidence?
Wayne, I'll let you answer that.
Because we know we have 500-year storms every 20 years or so now.
I mean, that's a really difficult question to answer because there's a limit to any system. And I would say that by the time you're talking about a 500-year storm, you're talking about so much water that whatever we do here is going to provide a reduction because we're taking more water than our site is putting off. But is there going to come a time that so much water is coming through that it's overwhelming every other aspect of the system surrounding it, that it kind of becomes a moot point. I mean, stormwater systems in the street are just, a lot of systems are designed for a 25-year storm. So, you're much more likely to have catastrophic issues coming from Route 206 than you are from, the minor changes to this property in terms of a contributing factor to, massive, rainfall and flooding issues. I think that's probably the best way to look at it.
But I'll add that, yes, this basin will be retaining over a longer period of time up to the 100-year storm quantity. And therefore, yes, the 500-year quantity coming out of the basin will be reduced as it travels downstream. But at a 500-year storm like Ida, all bets are off. It's not, you won't notice any difference.
Yeah, I wanted to ask this partly for the benefit of the homeowners, because we know that climate change, is resulting in more frequent storms and systems will be overwhelmed on a regular basis. Mr. Ingram, you made a comment at one point in your presentation where you said, if we've got a couple of feet of water in 206, we've got bigger problems than just what's happening on these sites. And I agree with you, but we also know that we do have those bigger problems. And I guess this is an okay time for me to be saying that I think from the standpoint of the neighbors, this project, it sounds to me, should not be a cause for concern in the sense that this project will improve the current situation. But from the standpoint of the homeowners of these new homes, it just feels like this is not the right place to be building. We know that we have a lot of homes in Princeton already that are located where homes should not be located for the coming 100 years with climate change that's coming. And so, I don't think we really have a lot of wiggle room as a board if this is a completely conforming application. But I just want to say, that I feel bad for the people who are going to buy these homes, because I think in 30 years, they're going to wish they hadn't in this
Thanks.
location.
Thank you, David. I feel the
I-
same way.
Can I respond to that? Because
Yes,
I'm
Mr.
gonna-
Raven.
Thank you. I understand the position there. And I want to, first of all, thank you for recognizing that we've done everything we can to improve the condition for our neighbors. Vis-a-vis the people that are buying this home, the location is going to be open and obvious. I'll be fully transparent in terms of what they're buying and this stormwater retention system. So they're going to understand it coming in, and to the extent that the concerns you've raised are in the community, they're known at large. So I'm not going to be hiding anything from anyone in terms of these prospective buyers. And I think look, the first time I walked this property, I fell in love with it because of the location. And I think that's going to be, it's just so close to Mountain Lakes Preserve. It's right close to Nassau Street. And that's the reason that I purchased it. And, this is a dream of mine to build these homes. And I think that there are going to be people that share, that vision and will appreciate it for those reasons. And to the extent that they have this concern about flooding, I'm going to disclose it and let them make their decision.
I see your hand up, Mr. Quinn. Go ahead, Tim, and then I have a question.
Thank you. I sort of want to echo some of what Mr. Cohen said. First of all, I give you a lot of credit for coming in with a much better application than what we saw in February. I think a lot of hard work was done, and with good intention. And I was fortunate enough to serve on this board with people like Mildred Trotman, for instance, who believe that people had a right to develop land that they purchased. And I have to say, having said all that, and I know that there's a family element too with Mr. Raven and his vision for this, I'm still not seeing 3 houses on this site. Frankly, I don't know how a single home was approved on this site. I imagine that the approval was in the 60s or the 70s, and I'm struggling with this because you've made a lot of good changes, and I trust that you've set up a way that to address some of the concerns of the neighbors. But I look at this and I say, what were they thinking in 1968 or 1971 when they allowed someone to build a house on this site? And now I don't want to be the guy like 50 years from now that someone who's sitting in my seat says, what were they thinking in 2020 when they approved 3 houses on a site where you could make the case 1 house shouldn't have been built? So, I mean, at this point, you kind of guess that I'm inclined to vote against. And even though it's fully conforming, you've done a lot of work. I appreciated your response to Mr. Cohen, but it just seems like not the right place, especially for 3 units. I raised my circulation concerns previously. So anyway, I'll stop speechifying. And I just wanted to get on the record that I just don't see this.
And if I may, my response to that is, I think I respect your opinion, but I think it's unfair because we're fully conforming. and we've worked hard to take a non-conforming lot and make it a half-acre lot. And if this was going to be restricted from development, that should have been something that was known to me prior to my purchase. So, this was, we've worked hard to meet every regulation in terms of setback, stormwater, you name it, we're conforming. And, I'm asking for fairness now. And I've come this far in this process, under the existing rules.
Fair enough, sir. I appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
Yes, as do I. Mr. Chow and then Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, I guess it's to this point about the flood risk and climate change, and that you're all conforming. I appreciate that and the great efforts you've gone to meet the stormwater requirements. It seems to me that if you do have a prospective buyer, they're going to assess that risk, and you're maybe leaving some value of your property off the table by not maybe making the house, elevated, maybe having the first floor raised, that basement raised or on pylons or whatever, like a building at the shore. So it seems, you might want to consider making it more attractive to a prospective buyer by making it appear more floodproof. So just a thought.
Well, I point out that they're already raising up these homes above the existing grade. I mean, that point is well taken. I think, though, that it could quickly get to the point where they look like very oddball structures up way up high, although your point is certainly taken. Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, from a legal perspective, from my perspective, really, may I ask you, Jerry, to define, for me at least, what does, legally speaking, conforming mean? And how do I, as a planning board member, know at this juncture that, legally speaking, this is a conforming project?
Jerry, you're muted.
Conforming means that it complies with all the municipal regulations, that is the zoning ordinance, the site plan and subdivision ordinances, that no variances are necessary that would be from the zoning ordinance. And also, although a lot of people wouldn't add this, I would, that no, what we call design waivers are necessary from the site plan ordinance or the subdivision ordinance. And the way we would know that one way or another is we would really rely upon staff who have evaluated it to tell us whether there are any variances or waivers that are necessary. There are submission waivers, that is from checklist items, but that's just submission of documentation, but that doesn't go to whether something is compliant.
Jerry, a follow-up. If in fact what you're telling me is that this is, in your judgment, based on this definition, a conforming situation, what is the legal basis for a planning board decision where there is a conforming applicant?
It would be very difficult in those circumstances defending a denial.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, I guess the way I understand it, and I'm not necessarily like, saying one way or another, but the planning board can justify a denial if the project is compromising the welfare of the residents. Is that I don't know legally if we should go down this route, but I mean, is that grounds for denial?
No, the planning board, not in my opinion. The planning board would have a lot of power when there's a conforming application to impose reasonable conditions. And the board could do that here as it could in any other application. And that power is quite extensive. And that power can be used to address the concern, Zenon, you just raised about protecting the interests of the public.
Oh, so we can put conditions in the interest of the public, but we can't deny an application in the interest of, or the welfare of the public.
Correct.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Sorry, Mr. Cohen?
Yeah, and I think this goes to Phil's point about trying to make the structures more resilient. And I agree with Ms. Wilson. I wouldn't want to see them lifted up on, stilts or anything like that. But I do think that a reasonable condition would be to not have basements for these structures in this location. I think that, it's close enough to a flood area. The basements will be wet all the time. They can actually, as the groundwater table rises, basements can actually exacerbate conditions for neighboring properties by displacing groundwater. I heard the applicant say these basements are above the groundwater table, but that's the groundwater table today and not the groundwater table in 50 years. So I would propose that as a condition, actually, that these houses be designed without basements for that reason.
That was a concern I was going to express as well. I was curious about whether or not the what I think is likely to be near continuous sump pump discharge was being factored into the stormwater system. Not that it would be gushing out there, but I too, I mean, if at any point in the future a basement was used as somebody's primary living space, for a kid that came back home after college or something like that, I really think that is an unnecessary risk. And so I too would ask if the applicant would consider building these homes without basements. Mr. Ingram, did you have your?
But if I may.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to that briefly. Sorry.
But if I may, just to remind the board that the applicant does not have to consent to any condition. The board has the authority to impose them themselves. So I just wanted to remind the board of that again.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Ingram?
Yeah, I just wanted to, note that, going from north to south, the houses are intended, are rising in grade. So, even the lowest house closest to the basin, we provided a groundwater mounding analysis that showed that, the height of the water level would still not be impactful at the distances that they're away. And, we have done testing on the site to establish the water table in various locations. And we don't believe that there's going to be, any impacts, to these. And, especially, again, going all the way to the south, I mean, the house as shown on our plans was at an elevation 149. I mean, which is, over 10, 12 feet higher than the groundwater table, on the lower end of the site. So, there comes a point where, you got to feel comfortable that, we're a certain distance above it. If certain times of the year that a sump pump works, I mean, that is not an uncommon feature anywhere, but, I do believe even in spite of that, these houses should not have a, significant issue with water in the basements.
If I may, I'm going to speak openly and frankly on this point. If a condition to the approval was that we had to demonstrate that a basement was not a significant impact, I would consent to that immediately. I will demonstrate to the satisfaction of your experts or any expert that you designate that the inclusion of a basement is not going to have a significant impact. And that can be, the expert can be within your control. Because I want to comply, because I respect the question, but I think it genuinely changes the nature of, the dwelling, and that if this is just a concern that's not borne out by, experts who analyze the actual conditions on the site, then I think it's an unfair condition. So I don't want to delay this vote. I would like to hear the vote. But I would certainly consent to an additional burden for me to demonstrate to the satisfaction of an expert that the basement was or was not, appropriate.
Thank you for those comments. Are there other questions or comments from board members? I never closed the public hearing, so I'll ask one more time. If there are members of the public who wish to speak, offer comments on this application, you need to raise your hand right now. Not people who have already spoken, but other folks. I am not seeing any, so I'm going to close the public hearing. Mr. Cohen.
I just want to follow up a little bit on this question of the basement. I mean, we know that there is a wetlands in the backyard of the center house. I mean, essentially what that means, if I'm understanding it correctly, is that the groundwater table at a certain time in the year, at least, is at the surface. I mean, isn't that essentially what a wetlands is? Somebody who knows more than I do can
If the
answer
question
that.
is posed to me, I mean, generally it means you have groundwater, say within 18, 24 inches of the surface. But again, when you look at the location of the wetland in relation to the elevation and the grade of the house, say I had, we have grade of about 140 in the back. If the groundwater table is 1.5 feet below grade and it's a 138.5, I could build a 10-foot base or a 9-foot ceiling basement on two of these houses and they would still be above groundwater. So, I mean, we can, and we're distant and we're uphill from that area. So all those things are going to mitigate, those kind of concerns. I mean, I don't think the applicant wants to, put millions of dollars into a house to find out that he's got a basement issue. And that's something he's going to investigate on his own to make sure he doesn't have a problem. But I do believe we're sufficiently elevated.
Well, and I noticed you said 2 out of the 3 houses.
Well, I mean, the
So
lowest
maybe
house
that's telling us
today-
something, right?
The lowest house today is lower and it's closer to the basin. We did provide the mounding analysis. The mounding shows that the excess water we're putting into the basin is not going to impact or reach that house. Could we just raise that house a little bit higher to match the other grade of the one next door and get it up a little bit? Yes, we could even do that. But I think the condition that the applicant's telling you is that he's going to provide that, to your expert satisfaction, I think resolves the issue in any event, to ensure that's an issue, not an issue.
Well, we have to formulate that condition carefully because the question is, what are we asking the expert to review? Are we asking them to review that the groundwater table is going to remain below the basement floor level? Or, are we going to ask them to demonstrate that the groundwater table is going to remain below the basement floor level for the coming 50 years? Because we know that groundwater levels can change over time, and we actually expect them to with climate change.
I can make another point of reference. The inlet in the road, in the street is 140.8. If there's no water running down the middle of the road or within a reasonable distance to its surface, it's unlikely that we're going to have a consistent or concerning issue with water in a basement with a house where the basement is essentially the same as the lower road grades, more or less. I mean, it's just, I just don't see that as a very significant issue here. Which again, if we have water running down the streets, we again have bigger problems here than these 3 houses.
Yeah, and I know everyone is hesitant to argue with an expert witness. It's our experience living in town. And I live in the, not very far from this house, in the neighborhood across the street at a higher elevation. And so many houses that are at a higher elevation than this have water in the basement chronically. And I know that Mr. Cohen and Ms. Sachs are aware of much broader problems, not to mention Mr. Purcell. And it's a growing problem. And because of the location of this site in an area that floods in dramatic fashion, not just, nuisance water in the basement, as is experienced all over town, but the potential for, gushing water in the basement. It's a scary prospect for us when we have to make the call. Are there other questions for the applicant from planning board members, or an interest on the part of any board member to make a motion?
Well, I'd like to ask Jim Purcell to help us formulate a condition related to the basement if he feels able to do so.
I'll start by saying that I'm a little uncomfortable since the land use code has nothing in it to prohibit the construction of a basement. I'm also a little hesitant because I too, David, am not sure what an expert would be looking at. I almost feel like I should be moving to a practical standpoint, that at the time they start excavating for a basement, if dewatering needs to take place in order to construct the basement, I think we've got a problem. We have it across this town. We have it going on right now on a project where I advised the applicant and his architect to not build a basement, and they're constantly draining the excavation because they didn't listen to my recommendation. I've also recommended in my memo that they not build basements in this location, but we have no land use authority to keep them from doing it. So I don't know how to formulate. I'm sorry, I just don't know how to formulate a condition.
That's okay. And I'll push back just a little bit by saying, you can't wait until you're excavating, because the applicant can choose to excavate in August or September when the groundwater table is it's not at the seasonal high. And they may well not end up dewatering if they do their excavation at the right time of the year, but they could still have a problem come spring. So in addition to the fact that it's hard to change your plans you kind of want to plan for whether you're going to have a basement or not.
Sure. Mia Sachs?
I just want to keep us on track here. I know that we all wish things were different with these properties, but they are what they are. And this planning board has a somewhat checkered history in terms of thinking that it's above the law and can approve or not approve things that are as of right, and impose conditions which may or may not be legally supportable. So just keeping us all here grounded in reality and what we can do. I think if there are conditions that we can impose, let's figure out what they are. And I would love to see everyone channel their energy rather than wringing our hands with applicants who have followed the law and followed a process that we may wish was different. Let's focus our energy on trying to create a more productive framework for development and construction in Princeton. I will mention that I have been raising, and Councilman Cohen will attest to the fact that I've been talking for some time now about what we could do in terms of restricting basements throughout the town in areas where they shouldn't be built. But I'm just wondering, for tonight, in tonight's hearing and in this application, are there any legally supportable conditions that perhaps our staff can recommend that would be helpful? And if not, I think we should move forward to conclude whatever we're going to decide tonight.
Well, Jerry gave us pretty explicit direction that this is a condition we could impose. and the applicant does not need to agree to it.
Mr. Bodigheimer?
I just wanted to echo everything that Council Member Sachs said, and that I feel like, you know, I've heard everything on either side. I don't think that there's new information being added at this point, and it's basically, you know, we're uncomfortable with this and we don't like it on the one hand, and there's no reason that we have to oppose it on the other, and that just means I think we have to suck it up. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Mr. Quinn?
I just want to repeat that my understanding was that we could impose a condition that these houses not have basements. And I would support such a motion if it were made, and vote in favor of these houses without basements.
Yeah, my advice is the same as it was a few minutes ago, which is I think the board can impose that condition.
I mean,
Okay, are there-
if Mia or Nat wants to propose something more along the lines of what the applicant was requesting, some kind of a metric that would allow them to do basements under certain circumstances and not under others, I'm very open to that, but I
David,
don't know what that condition would be.
David, I'm sort of agnostic on that. Jim, could you just weigh in again on what were you saying you just had an issue with trying to create a metric, but you didn't have an issue with not having the basements at all? And let me just add, I'm sorry, a follow-up question. Is the issue with the basements beyond what might be the potential problems for the homeowners who obviously would be buying with the awareness that they are going to very likely have basement problems? But do the basements contribute to problems for this? Do they potentially contribute to the issues, the water issues with the adjacent neighbors? Those are my 2 questions. Thanks.
Well, that second question is nearly impossible for me to answer without appropriate groundwater modeling of a very large area of within this vicinity. I will try to reiterate that a condition, and I think they already meet the condition because they've already done substantial soil testing, but a condition could be that the bottom of a basement slab needs to be 2 feet above the seasonal high groundwater table. And I do believe they have that information. Wayne, you've got significant soil tests. You've shown that your green infrastructure has to be 2 feet above the seasonal high groundwater table anyway. And I think by raising the elevation and as long as the foundations are above that, I think we are okay. I mean, the footings don't have to be, but at least the basement slab should be 2 feet above. That would be a reasonable condition based on a metric.
Do you have another comment, Mr. Boddingheimer? You're on mute.
I actually have a question, which is a procedural question, which is what is our latitude to act by saying basically we're going to approve the application subject to conditions that we will articulate within a time frame. So that, I mean, of 2 weeks. And I'm again, this is, I see David, Councilman Cohen shaking his head. My question, that's a question that reflects my discomfort with trying to come up with a condition on the fly, whereas we kind of understand the basic framework. We don't really know what the condition is that we need to impose, and it doesn't sound as if we need further testimony or input from the public at this point, but we do need some time to deliberate on what exactly is an appropriate condition. And as I said, I'm not really sure it's fair to put on staff the burden of cooking up a condition that hasn't really been thought through in advance of this meeting, and we're all feeling kind of pressured to take an action. So that's why I asked this procedural question.
Well, when the board votes on a motion, it will be a motion with a set of conditions that we will have reviewed in advance, and where where it appears that there's a consensus as to them, and we'll basically mark ones that need further discussion and maybe a separate vote. And then the mover of the motion would have to decide whether to put in that condition or not. But I don't know how we can set it up, Nat, where we defer addressing this motion, this issue until a later point.
Ms. Sachs?
I just wanted to ask Councilman Cohen what he thinks of Jim's proposal, because in the discussions that David and I have been having about basements in general, and we seem to have reversed roles here, because I think I've been coming down much harsher on restrictions on basements. But I think what Jim proposed, David, was the position that you had taken in our discussions about basements. So I'm just wondering, in this particular instance, if it's a position that you agree with, since that had been a position that you had been advocating for in our discussions.
Yeah, so let's put it this way. I could vote for a motion that had that condition attached to it. I'm not sure I could make a motion that had that condition attached to it. My concern is that I realize that there's groundwater in the ground that is above the seasonal high water table. Basically, when you have a heavy rainstorm, it takes a while for the water to soak into the ground and get down to the water table. And the whole time that it's soaking through the ground, which is saturated and adjacent to the basement, the water is getting into the basement. So just making sure the basement is above the seasonal high water table does not mean the basement will stay dry. I think I heard Jim say that, he recommended in his memo on this application that the houses would be better if they didn't have basements. And it's just it's a determination by the board whether to protect the future owners of these homes from a situation of chronic water in the basement. And also, we know that the way that water gets out of a basement with the sump pumps can have detrimental effects to neighboring property owners. Now, I don't know if that may not be the case here, because that may be mostly what happens when you have an old house with a new sump pump and no one's really reviewing how the sump pump discharges. Hopefully in this instance, the sump pumps would need to discharge to the system and to the bioretention swale. So at least we could be fairly confident that we're not harming the neighbors. This is really a condition that's about trying to protect the future owners of these homes, that rather than something that's out of concern for the neighbors.
And if I may add, David, because I'm on the same page as you are, even that condition is difficult to consider, because the seasonal high water table is just that, and the seasons are changing, and therefore the seasonal high water table is going to change. And we cannot predict where it will be. Even the day after Mr. Ravine builds the house. We know where it is now because they've done soil testing, but 2 or 3 years from now, when the first house is getting ready to be sold, I have no idea. I cannot prognosticate. So.
Okay, so Ms. Sachs?
Just have a follow-up question, just to be clear. So Jerry, we are or are not on legally solid ground in, if we were to, impose a condition of no basements? Because I also, is that, what is your answer to that?
I think we are. I mean, it's not that it's a slam dunk. And if it was challenged in court, we could lose, but I think the likelihood is that we would prevail. I think we're on solid ground based upon the discussions that we had about kind of what the situation in the area is with respect to water table, flooding, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so given, and I'd like Jim's comment on that, and I would just like to say, given that we are very frequently sued, even for decisions that we make, which are on very solid ground, and we spend taxpayer money defending those decisions, which, Jerry, we frequently hire you to defend those decisions. I just want to make sure that if we decide to go that route, that everyone feels that it is so important that these 3 houses not have basements, that it's worth spending taxpayer money to defend that decision.
Right.
I'm not weighing in one way or another, because I myself, as David can speak to, have been advocating for very strong townwide policies that forbid basements in any place where they could possibly be even just slightly, below the water table. So, but my other question is, I'm sorry, Louise, if you wouldn't mind, I just have a question to Mr. Rabin. Why would you want to build basements given what, and I'm speaking as someone who has spent a lot of money on my basement and it's still flooding. Like, why would you want to subject future homeowners to that?
My answer to that is, I don't want this discussion to veer off into what's legally permissible and what might lead, who might win if we're arguing about abuses of discretion. I'd much rather, build responsibly and be able to defend to this group and the people who are obviously, it's 9:20 at night and we're all engaged in this conversation very, intently. So my answer to your question is, if I thought it was irresponsible and I was buying these people a headache that they would never be able to, be relieved of the whole time they own the house, I wouldn't build it. So I'd much rather, and Mr. Mueller and can speak to this, I'd much rather agree on and consent to a condition that's rational and that's borne out by the conditions on the site. And I think we have to explore that. And I don't know who it's fair to put somebody on the spot and say, what's rational in this circumstance? And if the basements can be done, intelligently, safely, based on the conditions on the site, then we can build the basement. And if not, then we can't, and we won't, and we'll agree not to. So I'd consent to that condition, which I tried to formulate for us a few minutes ago.
Well, and with respect, we can talk about the conditions today, but to Jim's point, and others have made it as well, the conditions tomorrow will be different. And this is an area of town that, when we have big storms, experiences dramatic flooding. So I would push back on any hint of an abuse of discretion on our part by prohibiting the building of basements if somebody were to make a motion to that effect.
I think I shouldn't have used that term possibly, but I was saying I don't want to go there. I don't want this conversation to detour into that. I'd much rather formulate something that addresses your concern and that we can agree to.
Yeah, well, I really do appreciate that. And I actually also really appreciate the sort of pointed questions posed by Ms. Sachs and Mr. Taylor and Mr. Boddingheimer to sort of get at this question of what we really can do, because it's not every day that we're faced with this kind of tough, this tough a call. So
Has his hand up.
points well taken. I'm sorry, hand up. I'm not seeing it right now.
Oh,
Oh, Mr.
I
Quinn,
put it back
sorry.
up. I've been listening to Mr. Purcell say basically that such a condition is, I wouldn't, impossible is not the right word, but it seems like we've been discussing this for 20 minutes or so, and no one's come up with a condition that they're comfortable defending. And due respect to the applicant, I'm just not hearing anything that's leading me to believe that such a condition is possible. And this board also sometimes makes conditions that come back to bite it in the collective nether reaches, and I would be loath to vote on a motion that has a condition that's sort of half-baked or unenforceable.
Mr. Texarney,
And this is a
Yeah,
good discussion, by the way. I think it's a very good discussion.
yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that even though it might seem kind of belaboring, I mean, I think that, you know, these are real important issues, and we're, you know, really thinking about a problem that will happen. I don't know. I like the idea of, you know, not having the basements, just because I think that they're going to be problematic. But I mean, I think that perhaps a condition that maybe the applicant can agree upon is perhaps a condition to not furnish the basements at minimum, and perhaps you know, not have a basement at the one house that's next to the retention basin. I think as maybe like a compromise. I mean, I still think that, you know, these basements are going to be flooded, and, you know, there's going to be damage to these people's property, but hopefully it will be much less than a furnished basement or with a person living there or being down there. Because I mean, you know, we had a situation in Ida, you know, I mean, not saying that this would happen here, but, you know, people were living in basements in New York City and people died. So I personally don't want to be responsible for a decision that, you know, leads to somebody, you know, getting, you know, drowning or something like that.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. That's a little bit of an extreme extrapolation. I understand.
I know I don't mean to exaggerate,
not
but you
really-
know, that it did happen. And so, you
Yes,
know,
I understand people live in basements in New York City, but we do actually
yeah,
run a tighter ship here in the.
yeah.
May I just make a suggestion, and I think it's helpful. If we agreed that the basement the slab had to be 2 feet above seasonal high, and that we wouldn't construct the basement if we had to dewater during excavation, that would be a condition that we would consent to, and then we don't have to have the rest of this discussion about, you know, your ability to impose that restriction.
I guess I would ask in reply whether you are willing to wait to do your excavation until seasonal high water is in effect. Or are you confident that you can tell where the seasonal high water mark is based on?
I mean, I am, from the amount of testing that we performed out there, you know, we have significant soil logs that were done, you know, throughout. I mean, we're not the first person to test this either. You know, there have been wet season soil testing done on the property. And if we can design to that, you know, I think, or, you know, if it ends up construction takes place in the winter, so be it, and it tells us different. But I think we have significant testing out here to prove this.
Right, so
We have a we don't have a motion at all yet, but we have a suggestion that one could move approval with no basement, with the condition that there be no basements, and another suggestion that one might move approval with the condition that the basement slab would be 2 feet above seasonal high water table, and that if there were any water, standing water issues when the basement is being excavated, that the basement would not be built. Did I capture that correctly?
Louise, I would add to that what you originally suggested, which is that the excavation should be done during a time, during the wet season.
Well, but we already know the applicant wants to start construction this
Yeah,
fall, which is not.
I can't
right.
agree to that part, Jerry. It's just,
And Mr. Ingram pointed out, and Mr. Purcell was nodding at the time, maybe, I hope I wasn't misinterpreting, that you can tell where the seasonal high water table is, now. That is not to say that is where it's going to be tomorrow. It almost certainly will not be there tomorrow. So that's a real issue. Mr. Bodekheimer?
Another procedural question. Can an alternate make a motion?
Good question, Mr. Muller.
Actually, no, Mr. Bodenheimer will not be participating in the vote.
Right.
So he cannot make a motion.
Exactly. Alternate number one, who is alternate number one, Kerry?
Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, he could, because he's going to participate in the vote, because,
Because Owen O'Donnell is not here.
oh, well, that's right, without Owen.
Well, I think what you were saying is that Mr. Taylor can participate because Mr. O'Donnell is absent. Did I misunderstand your point?
No, that's correct.
Yeah.
Well, I would be willing to make that motion contingent upon Mr. Purcell verifying that he thinks that is a viable path forward.
Yes, it is.
Then
This motion, then, the condition being the slab being 2 feet above seasonal high water table, is that as opposed to the no basements one?
Correct.
Okay.
And I take it part of that is that they will not build the basement if the dewatering is required during excavation for the basement.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay. So that has been moved. Is there a second to that motion?
I second the motion.
Thanks, Mr. Taylor. Ms. Phillip, would you call the roll, please?
Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, do you want to
Madam Chair,
discuss?
Jerry likes to run through all the
Oh,
conditions.
of course.
before we
Oh,
take the vote.
I'm sorry. I did this last meeting too. Jerry, would you review the conditions?
Yes. Okay, I'm going to first go through those on my notes, so they're kind of in random order, and then I'll go through the various reports. There's a lot of reports, but I think we can do it quite quickly. Access easement for the second lot over the first lot and third lot over the second lot. That's one. Now, the first two houses would have 15-foot drive, the third would have a 10-foot drive. That's already been done in the revised plans, correct, Jim? Okay. Then we have a whole set of things about saving trees, et cetera, and native plantings. I think maybe we'll just have a condition that Jim had suggested, actually, that the landscape committee review the application, as opposed to getting into the detail of
Yes.
various things.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay. Then use planted area in front of house with stabilized base to accommodate emergency vehicles. And any board member or staff member should jump in if they don't agree.
I don't think that's necessary.
No? Okay.
No, I think that was a comment when they had they were doing all of the clearing. They're not doing the clearing anymore.
Okay, that's fine.
The driveway's fine.
Okay, fine. Then the trash removal cans brought to Route 206, no tree removal for that. I will provide conservation easement for the undisturbed wetlands. HOA, which are basically maintain the common areas and the stormwater management system. Deed and deed notice with respect to stormwater management system in the HOA documents. Do we want to say anything specifically about the trees on 206, where the applicant said they will make basically their best efforts to preserve those trees, or just leave it as part of the landscape subcommittee? Landscape subcommittee, Jim?
I would just leave it as landscape subcommittee.
Okay, that's fine.
That happens to be recommended condition of approval number 6.5 on my memo.
Okay. And when we get to your memo, I think we're probably gonna, I've already reviewed things. And then green building components as set forth in what will be Exhibit A3. That's that email that Mr. Rabin will forward to me in some form from Mr. Ward, and which he read. Then the basement condition that we talked about. Slab at least 2 feet above seasonal high water table, and no basement if dewatering during excavation is necessary. Then in terms of the reports, I could go through those in Joe Scoopion's report of July 5.
Jerry, if you just go to the section 6 of my memo, I think we've got that covered.
Okay. Well, by the way, there's going to be waivers of minor checklist items except for solid waste disposal. And those are laid out in Jim and Derek's memo of December 17th, 2021.
And they testified to that.
Okay, and then on Jim, on yours and Derek's page 3, applicant must describe the access, drainage, and stormwater management easements by meets and bounds on each lot for each deed, and to whom it's granted. It seems to me that's an appropriate condition. And I think a lot of them you probably repeated at the end of yours.
Yes. Yeah, I think, and that's why I say, if you just go to section 6, I repeated the ones that I think should be conditions.
Okay, let me just go through the others, just to,
Okay.
I'm comfortable with that. Okay, then the applicant, this is on your page 4, should provide deed restrictions for use of the properties on which the wetlands and wetland transition areas will exist to serve as notification to future property owners regarding the restrictions. I think that's worth putting in. I'm not sure you have that later. You might, Jim. And then there were several on trees, but we won't put that in because we'll have the more general landscape committee resolution. Okay, a whole bunch of them. Stormwater management maintenance manual must be revised to be specific to the system.
Mhm.
Now that curb opening, the latest plan show the curb
They-
opening
Yeah,
revised.
the latest plan complies with the comment.
Okay, good. And the 10 and 15 feet, that's in,
That's complied with as well.
yeah, and the hammerhead's been reduced.
Yeah. They've complied with all those.
Yeah. Okay, now, the existing curb ramp to remain must be elevated by the applicant and reconstructed to current standards. Does that have any applicability anymore?
Yes, the existing curb ramp on Route 206 is potentially substandard, and
Okay, so
If they're replacing the sidewalk, they'll have to bring that curb
so
ramp
that'd
up
be a
to
condition.
standard.
And then the sanitary sewer connection fee is required to be paid prior to issuance of building permits. Then on your more general comments, which are sections 5 and 6, basically all of them should be in, Jim, that haven't been covered previously, that I haven't already covered.
No, I believe the general comments were that I was looking for them to testify to some of those things, and they did.
Okay, so you don't need
And
that,
then I think if we just jump to section 6, we're good.
and just put in all those sections.
Yeah.
Okay, and if any board member wants me to read them, I can.
No need.
Said enthusiastically.
Quickly, anyway.
And then Dan Dobromilsky, okay, wait, there's your supplemental, a memo. Like, I don't think there's anything on that it's already been addressed. They've already been addressed. I think all of Dan's conditions, and he has a number of recommendations. Those will all be subsumed within the landscape committee review. Michael Laplace had made a suggestion, which we really didn't talk about permitting a left turn from the property on 206 northbound. He asked whether it's advisable or should exiting the site by vehicle be restricted to right turns only heading southbound. Is that anything we want to get into?
No, I believe we did discuss that, Jerry, and
Okay.
the relocation of the driveway made it greater sight distance, and with a center left turn lane on Route 206, it's not as dangerous as it appears.
Okay. And then Dan McGinnis's memo. Let me see. They want we're requesting applicant's engineers provide Princeton with all correspondence to and from NJDOP permit units regarding the access design. I assume we want that.
Yes, the access from Route 206 will be subject to an NJDOT permit.
Do we want to have a condition? Dan suggests our office defers to the fire department to determine if the terminus of the access drive provides sufficient turning radius for emergency vehicles to turn around. But the idea was that they were going to park on.
That's right. They would access from Route 206, just like any other
Okay.
single-family home.
Parking should be prohibited along the access drive. The site plan should be revised to indicate appropriate signs and sign details. That seems appropriate.
It's a shared use driveway. I'm not sure
I
that
don't think it's
you're not going to put no parking signs along a shared use driveway.
okay, it might be overkill. Okay. Then the access drive profile appears to, and this might have been from a prior review. This is from January 3, 2021. The profile should be revised to indicate a maximum sidewalk cross slope of 2%.
Yeah, that's going to be in the standards anyway. So
Okay.
yeah, we could put that in as a condition. Maximum
Okay.
2% cross slope. That's ADA requirement.
Then the applicant must meet the municipal trees and shrubs ordinance replacement requirements. This is from the Shade Tree Commission report.
Again, that's landscaping.
Yeah,
And it's pertinent to the earlier plan where
yeah, right. Let's see if there's anything. I think all of these really go to the landscape subcommittee. We do have that standard condition we put in about protecting trees with a tree protection zone. Might as well put that in, I would guess.
yeah.
Then the environmental commission. Zenon, it seemed to me that Mr. Rabin, in reading those green sustainability and green infrastructure improvements, pretty much covered most of the things in the environmental commission report. Anything we want to add?
No, I think the upgrades or updates and what you mentioned address most of the things mentioned.
Okay. Yeah, grass lawn, soil remediation. exterior lighting, dark skies. We've dealt with all of that. I think that's pretty much it. Now, they say, and maybe the plans already do this, permeable pavers should be, or concrete should be used for all walkways as an additional means of stormwater management. No,
Now, with the new stormwater management system that they have in place, all of that's covered.
okay,
That if we were to require even additional, they'd have to add more underground reservoirs, and we don't want that. So,
and then I'm looking at SPRAB, and I think we've covered pretty much everything. Howard, did your letter from Mr. Ward cover EV charging stations?
Yes, there'll be 2 in each garage.
That's fine. And that's it.
Okay,
So that would be a preliminary and final major site plan and subdivision approval with the conditions and with the checklist waivers granted, except for the ones dealing with trash.
Jerry, did you mention the condition that we were just debating for half an hour? Did you?
Yeah, I didn't. I just referred to it as, I think I read it. You want me to go back over it?
If it won't take too long, if you could.
Sure. Basement slab, at the bottom of the basement slab, at least 2 feet above seasonal high water table, and no basement if dewatering occurs during excavation. If dewatering during excavation is necessary.
Okay.
okay, this was moved and seconded. And with those conditions on the table, I think we are ready for a roll call vote.
Ms. Capizoli,
Yes.
Mr. Chow,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Mr. McGowan,
Yes.
Mr. Quinn,
No.
Ms. Sachs,
Yes.
Mr. Texarney,
I'm gonna say yes with reservations. I still have concerns about the impact on stormwater in the front that I originally mentioned. I think that this site served as overflow, and I think in extreme events it did, and by putting up a barriers, wall, retaining wall, it's going to potentially cause problems, but I don't know. I think it's too hard to say at this point. So, and I don't want the town to get sued, so I'm going to say yes.
Mr. Taylor,
I think I should conform. Yes.
Conformance is not required.
Small letters.
Yeah,
Required for applications, but not for members of the planning board.
right, exactly. Thank you.
and Mrs. Wilson.
Yes.
Okay, motion carried.
Thanks, everybody. That was an important conversation to have. Mr. Rabin, and by the way, this is a fine time to ask, but am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, it's Raven.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks, Mr. Ingram, and Mr. Krumholtz. We
Thank you.
appreciate it, and good luck with the project, and we trust you to do what you said you would.
Thank you. I'll work to earn that trust.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks. Mr. Cohen,
Move to adjourn.
I'll second that.
all in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
David, if ever you miss a meeting, I'm going to say, without objection, the meeting is adjourned.